Now we're recording.
Greetings, everybody. Welcome to episode 2 of Geddry and Jurich. We have some very important topics to discuss today. There's, in my opinion, there's a lot of emphasis by religious fascists to take over nonpartisan races, including the school boards and so forth. And my cohort in crime over here, Israel, has done a tremendous amount of research on some local races. And I am so grateful to everybody who's watching. And I think I'm going to turn this over to Israel because he's on top of this one.
All right. Thanks. I'm glad to be continuing this project with you. Episode 2. Hey, that's twice as many as we've done already. And of course, if anyone is joining us, listening or watching, we're really glad to have you. We hope that you enjoy the show, or at least find it important and informative, and worth sharing with your friends. Yeah, our show today is going to be focusing on local elections, particularly the North Bend School Board election. But before we get into that specific election, we're going to want to discuss some of the background of the election, and of course, discuss the importance of school board elections in general, and making sure that our schools are safe and hospitable and successful for our kids. And in that interest, we want to. I'm not a parent. I don't have any kids in the district. I don't have any kids at all. So I definitely want to hear from Mary about her experience as a parent, because she has raised kids in our area, and she has some grandkids that are going to be are attending schools or are going to be attending schools in our area too. So we'll kick off with that. And Mary, you moved here in 2003 into the Coos area, and so some of your kids attended schools, and I'd be interested to hear your experience as a parent of kids in our district, your feelings about their success and safety. What were the criteria that you were looking for in your children's school experience? What was going to mean success for you?
Obviously, that their educational needs are being met, that they're happy, and that they're safe. And so my kids were in the Coquille School District, and there was a period of time, which I won't elaborate on, but there was a period of time where I did not feel that my kids were safe at the school, and that the school was not doing what it should have done to protect them. This was just my younger daughters. And I homeschooled them for a while. And in fact, for a period of time, they went to the Harding's Learning Center at Marshfield. But eventually, we began to feel more comfortable, and they went to the Little Winter Lakes program here, and graduated. And my oldest daughter's a U of O graduate in linguistics with a minor in folklore. And then my youngest daughter, she's now a mom. She dropped out of college, and she's got a great job right now. And she's got a little girl who's going to be going to school soon. She's 2 years old, so almost 2. So it'll be a little while, but she'll be in the school district. And I have a step-grandson who's in the school districts. And I've raised kids. I know how you can feel let down by the schools, or you can feel empowered by the schools.
Hmm.
And so it's very scary to me to see people who do not share my values, religious fascists, Christian white nationalists, trying to, I'd like to use the word infiltrate, these
Hmm.
nonpartisan positions,
Hmm.
school boards, county commissions, soil and water districts, ports, port commissions. And I think it's really important that we do some serious analysis of the people that are running races that maybe we didn't really pay attention to in the past.
Hmm.
I think we really have to pay attention to. And I'm really grateful to you, Israel, for all of the research you've done on this. And you've also got quite a history in this area. So I think you should share that.
Yeah, yeah. So firsthand, the challenges of and the concerns that parents bring to raising kids um, in the schools, and the kinds of things that are important to parents. The most important things, of course, is successful education, safety, and your kids have been successful. Before we talk about uh, my background and my connection with the North Bend School District and its history, I'm curious to know, like, beyond just education, how, do sometimes some of the most important things we take away from us take away with us when we graduate from school and move on into the community is our peer relationships. And I was just wondering, do your kids still have some of the friendships that they formed back in high school at Winter Lakes or
Absolutely.
in the...
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Especially my youngest daughter. She's like the social butterfly of the family. She's very, she's still got long-term close relationships that she touches bases with all the time.
Mhm.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
My older daughter is more of an introvert, like her mother. And so I don't think she's still really in touch with anybody local, but she has retained a lot of friends from her college days. So,
Yeah. So I think, yeah, just to add that other dynamic for things that parents are really actually interested in and concerned about with their kids' education. Obviously, their safety, obviously, their success as students, but I think there's also that interest that their kids are forming uh, healthy relationships, friendships, and developing the social skills that they're going to need that are going to help them succeed. And and of course, those relationships keep us healthy and happy and make us feel like we belong in a society and community. So those are all important factors. And transitioning the conversation to talk about the context in which we're looking at this North Bend School District election. The North Bend School District has, in recent years, it's made the news. There was a lawsuit brought against the district by a couple of students a few years back that ended up making national news. Two students, queer identified students, were experiencing discrimination from administration at that school, and they lodged a complaint with the Department of Education. And then the Oregon Department of Education did an investigation into their complaint to find out if there was any merit to it. And and what happened was, in the course of their investigation, they uncovered some evidence that ended up sparking a lot of uh, local anxiety and national interest. The most salient issue that the investigation turned up was that there were occasions in which students were being disciplined by administration by being made to read the Bible as
uh,
part of their disciplinary process.
uh,
And that's an obvious violation of the First Amendment and students' constitutional rights. But that wasn't what they were being sued over. That was just evidence in the lawsuit. They were being sued about discrimination. And the students who were suing, they were not interested in money. They didn't sue for money. What
Uh-huh.
they really wanted is they wanted discrimination experiences to end because they knew that it was something that was just normative for queer students at the district, that they were being harassed and they were being discriminated against, not only by their peers, fellow students who are bringing in these ideas that they might be raised with by their parents. And I'm going to be a little bit gracious for children who've been raised by their parents with these kinds of bigoted ideas, and they don't really know better. They should, but they don't. But not only were these students being facing that kind of harassment, but they're also facing it from staff, from teachers,
Mm-hmm.
and from administration officials.
Mm-hmm.
And I was I was involved with LGBTQ youth services, local youth services, volunteer services, and so I knew these students. I knew what was going on. I knew about their complaints, and I watched how, after the investigation came down and the Oregon Department of Education insisted that the administration address those issues, how the administration tried to sweep them under the rug. And and I encouraged the student who did talk to me about this to find an attorney and actually make sure that her rights were not violated, that her interests were not lost. And so they carried this lawsuit forward, and they sought administration change, and they sought a change in policy. And they didn't look for any money or damages for their own experience. They just wanted the students that came after them to have a better time, a better life at school than they did. That's all they wanted. It ended up becoming a major issue for that district, for the community around them. It really upset some of the far right churches that that members of those churches who had been working at those schools were being accused of discrimination against LGBTQ students, despite the fact that those churches are fostering that kind of animosity and bigotry
Sure.
all the time. And the students won. They won their lawsuit. The district settled with them and had to make certain policy changes, and the administration that had been mostly responsible for the discrimination was supposed to be removed from their position. They were removed from their position at the high school, but then just shuffled around. So they kept that person employed. And then he ended up countersuing and suing the district for wrongful dismissal or something like that. Basically, he alleged that the district discriminated against him, and he sued for monetary damages. Really bad faith activity on the part of that person all around. But the students, they moved on, and a GSA, a gay straight alliance, formed around the queer students that were still at that school, and it's still going today. And certain administration have been supportive and have helped give those students a safe space at the school, and people who will support them when they're dealing with bullying and harassment. And so the district has, in the remaining years, has really been working on making sure that all of the students who attend in the district are safe and are welcome and are able to receive an education without all of the extra baggage that can come from being a member of a marginalized community. And there have been people who've been working really hard on making the North Bend school districts hospitable for all students, and LGBTQ students included. We also have this moral panic that's happening right now on the national level, fostered by the far right to advance their own political agenda, and part of it has been exacerbated by the pandemic and by the QAnon conspiracy, and of course the Trump administration. And what happened was, you see this far right reaction to these kinds of efforts to make the school more safe and more inclusive. And so across the country, we see school boards being taken over by far right extremists, operating under dog whistles and pseudonyms like concerned parents and parents' rights advocates and things like that. And the effort has really been about pushing a far-right fringe agenda and turning our school districts into cultural battlegrounds, which is not what they're supposed to be, right? The school districts are supposed to be a place where people of a variety of different cultural positions and ideological perspectives and identities can come and get an education and feel safe and become successful and form healthy relationships that are going to benefit them and the community for the rest of their lives. And turning them into cultural battlegrounds is really a disservice to the entire community. But that's one of the things that's happened here in North Bend. In North Bend, we see a number of school board members take over. They're connected with the far extremist group, Citizens Restoring Liberty. They're connected with the kind of the alt-right movement and the moral panics around that. So almost immediately after you see this far-right takeover in the North Bend School District of the school board, you see them trying to ban mask mandates, for example. You see them trying to ban critical race theory, which I don't think they actually know what that is. But I think what they intend is not so much critical race theory is a specific thing, but the way the far right uses it is it's an umbrella term to describe any kind of instruction that looks at America's racial history in a way that doesn't whitewash it and present it as a thing of the past. Any kind of education around America's racial history that looks at how it has impacted the present is unacceptable to them because they fear that. I think what they really fear is that looking at our country's racial history and our community's racial history will result in some kind of cultural or systemic change that will reduce the power that conservatives have culturally.
Okay.
And so I really think, and that's what I think this entire moral panic effort and this effort to take over all of these different positions, nonpartisan positions, is really about. It's about the fear that the far right is losing cultural and social and political power. And in order to try to win that culture war, they're turning absolutely every position that they can into a cultural battleground. And so that's what we've been seeing at the North Bend School District. And it's been really concerning to parents. It's been really concerning to educators and administration who want to just focus on students' education, who want to just focus on making sure that the district can have a strong budget, can pass bonds to improve its infrastructure, because I know they have some buildings that need work, from some facilities that need upgraded, and who want to foster a strong, healthy educational environment. And then you have this school board that wants to advance religious and political interests that are really specific to their community and not at all benefiting the district and the community at large. And so, as a pro-democracy project that we're running here, this is an issue of concern for us. I'm not in the North Bend community. I live in Coos Bay. You live in another community too. You're not in North Bend either. But this affects our entire community, this effort that is going on. And this particular issue is an issue for a pro-democratic program to be addressing. And so that's where I think we have something to say. And we can look at this upcoming election. We can look at the crisis that our community is facing, who's being silenced, who's being left out of the agenda of this far right school board project and effort, and then we can try to lift up those voices and those concerns.
You've brought to mind a few months ago, maybe a year ago, a video surfaced that had been taken at one of the Citizens Restoring Liberty meetings, and the local outrage machine person was commenting. He said, "We've got a foothold." I don't know if that was the exact word that he used, and we've taken some positions on that board. And I think his issue at the time was CRT amongst mask mandates, because then he attacked the head of the Coos Health and Wellness, who happened to be on the board as well. But and we've actually got someone who's the board chair. So they are looking at all of these little positions as strategic, tactical
Yeah.
entries. But
Yeah, they're treating this is a cultural battle for them. This
yeah,
is not about leading a community and creating an institution that functions and works for the purpose in which it was designed. It's about
right,
turning that institution into a tool for political control, which is not what
yeah,
school districts are for, but that's
right,
what they're turning it into. This is a place where we can fight a cultural war against our cultural adversaries. And back then, you're right. Back then, it was about CRT and mask mandates, and it remains consistent throughout their history. And you can see that even today, that the
yeah,
far right will find a boogeyman. They will manufacture a threat, and then they will spread fear and panic about that threat to try to
right,
generate public support and fervor. And yeah,
yeah,
last year it was CRT, it was mask mandates, it was this threatening government that wanted to protect people's health. How dare they? And now the moral panic has shifted, and the focus has been on the LGBTQ community. And for our audience, I think at some point we're going to have to do a show on moral panic and on the LGBTQ
right,
conspiracy, the conspiracy about
right,
LGBTQ grooming. But for now, audience, if you're interested in the subject, Google moral panic, go look it up, find out what a moral panic is if you don't already know, and then look up also the LGBTQ grooming conspiracy, because that's a
right,
current moral panic, and it has evolved. That started, honestly, that this conspiracy has and moral panic has started in the 1970s in the wake of the sexual revolution, but it's evolved over time. And our most recent iterations of this particular moral panic were the QAnon conspiracy that was started on 4chan, that postulated that there was a secret satanic cabal of pedophiles that were running the Democratic Party, running the United States government, and were trafficking children in the tens and hundreds of thousands.
awesome.
And that Donald Trump was going to use the United States military to tear this cabal apart and then execute its practitioners in public television. That was QAnon conspiracy stuff, and it took off like wildfire. It got connected up with a lot of other conspiracies, including anti-Semitic conspiracies, anti-vax conspiracies. The whole thing coalesced into this weird monster. And when Donald Trump lost, and the conspiracy talked about the resurrection of certain dead political figures, and Donald Trump was still secretly president, it started to lose its following. But the moral panic around the pedophile thing, the Republicans and the far right capitalized on that and reawakened the moral panic that moral panic around gay rights that had always been around the gay rights movement, that the far right had always accused the gay rights movement of trying to go after people's children. That was something
Yeah,
that was an accusation being leveraged against gay men in the 1970s. It was being leveraged against the entire gay community throughout the 90s. And they lost. That moral panic didn't win their war against gay people. And they're resurrecting it to use it against gay people again, and the whole LGBTQ community. And they're calling us groomers, and they're accusing us of pedophilia. And that narrative is designed and now it has the backing of the entire political party in terms of passing laws and policies. It's designed to create moral panic. It's designed to take a whole segment of the population that genuinely cares about the safety of their children, the well-being of their children, and to turn that concern about safety into animosity and antagonism towards a whole other section of the population that has similar concerns about our own
Yeah.
kids and about kids who are like us,
Yeah.
and make us an enemy and make us into a threat. And we're not. We actually care, and we've been advancing policies and programs that are about protecting kids and about making kids safe. But you won't hear about that from the far right, and they're basically the moral panic. And that's something that's
Well,
been happening recently at the North Bend School District.
okay. And there are other marginalized groups that get picked on, the houseless
Mhm.
and immigrants and so on and so forth. What I think we should dig into the school board race.
Yeah, if
Uh,
I wanted to talk about a little bit about how the moral panic has hit the North Bend School
okay.
District
Okay,
before
sure.
we get into the candidates. Recently, we had the GSAs were organizing a pride event for
That's right.
LGBTQ students and their allies. And it was called Tides of Pride. It was going to be a pride event with instructional sessions
Mm-hmm.
for the students who wanted to participate with parent permission and their allies. And it was going to include schools from Brookings all the way up to Reedsport and the Coquille District and all of that. And they had 5 breakout sessions planned with different educational activities and programs available. And and the far right got wind of this, and one of those breakout sessions was scheduled to be taught by an organization of drag kings and queens that coming out of Idaho. And of course, because of the moral panic, because of the way the far right has painted drag and drag performances as these
Grooming.
predacious activities,
Yeah.
the far right got wind of this and started spreading their propaganda against it. And
Right.
drag performers, by and large, they're performers, they're public performers, and they often have range in terms of what kinds of performances, what kinds of programs they're capable of doing. And this particular outfit, some of their performers were, of course, involved in the organization's work with kids and doing educational performances under family-friendly pseudonyms, because drag performers use pseudonyms. But some of their performers also had range and had, outside of that activity, had personas and pseudonyms that they used for adult kinds of performances.
Mm-hmm.
And so the far found out what their adult performance pseudonyms were, and then
Mm-hmm.
leveraged that to try to create a panic around what kinds of content they were going to be bringing to this kid-friendly, family-friendly program. They spread that panic. Parents, primarily, I think, in the Coquille district, first pushed the district to back out of the Tides of Pride event, so they pulled out of it. And then the organizers said, wait, we don't want to lose this Tides of Pride event. We want to make sure that these kids have access to it and can do this. We'll just
Right.
drop the drag performance. We'll just say, no, that session isn't going to be part of the thing, and we're going to keep the Tides of Pride and do the other 4 breakout sessions. But by then, the far they smelled red meat, so to speak, and so they went after the entire event itself. We had the Rob Taylor report promoting propaganda and lies about the GSAs and about the parents and educators involved in supporting these students, calling them pedophiles, calling them groomers, bringing in speakers from bigoted organizations to make false claims about GSAs and about people who organize GSAs. And the Proud Boys got wind of it and made threats. Our education people and our teachers and our administration at North Bend School District, some of them were facing threats, and then their personal information was put online. They got doxxed.
Yeah.
At that point, the concern about the event became less of whether or not we can do this event without the drag show, but whether or not we can actually keep our kids safe while doing this when we have
Right.
Proud Boys threatening. And so what ended up happening is the far right basically created an environment where the kids themselves, these LGBTQ students at our school districts, would not be able to be protected and safe from the adults that wanted to threaten and harm them. And so the entire event was canceled. That's the kind of climate of hostility that this kind of far right movement and the school board candidates that they're putting forward are creating in our school districts. And North Bend is one of the centers of that because they have turned it into a cultural battleground. And so it has become a concern about the well-being and safety, certainly of LGBTQ plus kids, but also other kids who are, like you said, who are not, whose interests aren't being served by the far right agenda. So yeah, that's
Right.
going to be kids experiencing poverty, kids who depend on free lunch programs and other state
Yeah.
funded services. It's going to be students of color and students who practice religions that aren't Christianity or who
Right.
don't practice religion at all. All of those kids' interest and their families' interest in them getting a safe, successful education and forming healthy relationships in their school environment are all put at risk by the far right candidates that are who are trying to take over these schools and turn them into cultural battlegrounds. And that's where I think we can segue into this particular race at the North Bend School District and talk about the candidates and talk about the issues.
Yeah. Obviously, yeah. I wasn't aware that the Proud Boys had actually threatened people. Is there, where can I find that online or?
So I was speaking directly to some sources who were connected to the
Okay.
Tides of Pride event, and I'm not disclosing sources because
Okay.
I want to make sure that they've already been doxxed. Some of them have already been
Sure.
doxxed. Some of them are minors, and so we're going to just keep the information that's
Sure.
been disclosed to me is that Proud Boys got wind of the event and made basically
Right.
and indicated that they were going to get involved in trying to prevent this event from happening. And as we know, the Proud Boys are a violent misogynist gang. They're bigoted and homophobic and transphobic. They've been using basically their North Star is far right chauvinism, and 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 they we know that they use violence. It's been just a normal part of their operating procedure. So the safety of our kids is first
Sure.
and foremost.
Yeah.
And despite the far right claiming that they're about trying to protect kids, they really aren't. They're really about trying to protect their agenda, which is taking power over these institutions. And kids are just the pawns and tools in that game. They don't care if kids get hurt or are being threatened because they really don't care about protecting kids.
Well, once they're able to demonize people,
Mm-hmm.
or once they're able to declare a group of people as deviant, it's like a chemical thing happens in their brain where they're able to dispossess themselves of any responsibility for anything that happens
Yeah,
to the deviant.
yeah, yeah. And you've written about that. You've written about that
Yeah.
tendency to create this vitriolic language around a category of people or around specific persons that will, of course, inspire acts of violence against them. We call it stochastic
Stochastic. Yeah.
stochastic
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 terrorism.
terrorism. and
Yeah.
and yeah, that's exactly a tactic that's being used not only nationwide but locally on by some of these outrage outlets. So looking at the race, we have three positions at the North Bend School District School Board that are up for election. It's position 1, position 3, and position 7. Position 1 has 3 candidates running. Position 3 has 3 candidates running, and position 7 has 2 candidates running. And each of
Okay.
those positions has a far right candidate that's been endorsed by the Coos GOP and by of all things, by right to life, right? What is abortion rights doing being involved in school board elections? I have no idea. And
Yeah,
particularly nonpartisan school board elections.
right.
But they've been endorsed by those organizations. They've also been supported by far right groups like Citizens Restoring Liberty. We see their signs around the community. You can tell that they're the exact same signs in terms of their manufacture as the signs that have Faith Fest 21, the
Yeah,
Restoration
yeah,
Worship Centers program. This is
yeah,
part of an organized effort on the part of Christian nationalists to take over the North Bend School Board, and we can see the connections. Like, they're very easy to recognize, and they're
right.
going on the Rob Taylor report to promote their candidacy and their campaigns. They're working together, even though it's a nonpartisan position and nonpartisan. They're working together as if they are a party, and they have basically turned nonpartisan positions that have functional responsibilities to make a district work into a partisan, political, ideological campaign. And those
Wow.
candidates, by the way, that so for our audience to know, these far right candidates, that is in position one, that's Ginger, is it Kralachek?
Kralachek, it looks like, yeah.
Yeah, and then in position three, I believe it's Carol Yardley.
Yes,
And then
yes,
position seven, it's Michelle Roberts. And
right.
Carol Yardley and Michelle Roberts already serve on the school board. I believe they were appointed to vacant roles
Okay,
by the far right chair. So they
okay.
already serve, but they serve in different positions than they're currently running. But if they lose their elections, they won't be on the board anymore. And so that'll be a significant change in terms of how the board is controlled and operated by this far right agenda. Yeah.
Obviously, this is important, and we can do our best to make sure that they move on to other endeavors.
Yeah. So that's where we have to look at these other candidates that are running for these positions and
Right,
make some choices about who it is that we're going to back in terms of, if you're a North Bend School District voter, which
right.
hopefully some of our audience are. I'm not, and Mary's
I'm
not.
not.
So we're just giving you some background and education to help you make a decision. But I've been doing some research on the candidates, and I've talked to some of them, and so we do have some perspective, which hopefully, if you haven't been able to do that yourself, hopefully that what we share will help you make a choice. And so let's talk about position one. We have, of course, we talked about the far right candidate, Ginger Kralachek, and her associations and the agenda that they belong with. But we have some other candidates running for position one. We have attorney Nate McClintock, who's running for that position, and we have Dr. Daniel Emmett. And both of them are pretty similar in terms of their values. They're pretty balanced. They're pretty moderate. They are not far left candidates. They're not political ideologues, and so they're running because they understand the need for people who are going to care about the kids and the administration and staff and the community at large, and those kind of like broad, more inclusive democratic values that are starting to be labeled far left values, even though they're just the ordinary everyday values of our country. And the far right just keeps moving further right and starting calling everything to the left of Ann Coulter far left. But having been to the forums where these candidates were available to speak, and having some peripheral connections with some of the candidates, I think I can speak to what they care about and what they bring to the race. Nate McClintock is, I believe, the city attorney for the city of Coos Bay, but he's a North Bend resident. He has two daughters who are in the North Bend School District, so he's a parent. He comes to the race with a parent's perspective, as well
Right.
as a professional's perspective, having worked with the city government and having worked and served on boards. He has this really solid grasp of what the responsibilities are and a really solid grasp of what it means to be a leader in a community. He's really good at communicating with people and communicating clearly with people. He's good at setting priorities and has an understanding of the role of a school board member as a policymaker, as a liaison between parents and the district, and as a person who has responsibility over the budget and over the setting the path forward for that district. And listening to him talk about the things that matter to him as a candidate for the school board and the things that matter to him as a parent in the district, I have a lot of confidence in him as a candidate. A lot of confidence if he took position one, that he would lead that district really well. He has those kinds of skills and qualities.
Okay.
He has an understanding of what it is to manage a budget. He has an understanding of how to communicate the importance of, for example, raising funds through passing bonds, and how to communicate with a community in a way that helps them understand it as a community effort and responsibility to meet the district's needs. And he was able to speak to those issues. He was also able to speak to some of the issues of concern around this far right agenda, that LGBTQ plus students should not be facing harassment and discrimination or have a hostile environment at their school, that students of color, that homeless students should also have their interests and needs met, that school districts aren't a place for partisan, political, and religious ideology to become the atmosphere, but rather they're places where everyone can breathe the air comfortably and thrive. And so he's been able to articulate his position on making sure that students aren't facing discrimination and harassment for who they are. I'll turn it over to you.
I just have a quick question. I know you went to a forum that was put on, and that the far right candidates opted not to attend. Is that correct?
Yeah, not only did the far right candidates opt not to attend, they didn't even respond to 6 invitation emails. The position that the far right seems to be taking is that anyone who's nonpartisan, anyone who's, like I said, anyone who's to the left of Ann Coulter is somehow a far right leftist or has a far right leftist agenda. Basically, everyone is their enemy except for their friends. And that means that nonpartisan organizations like the League of Women Voters that sponsored this forum tried to create a space for everyone in the public to come meet the candidates, is being treated as a hostile organization by the far right. The League of Women Voters is a neutral organization. It's so neutral that someone who's a left-leaning person like myself gets frustrated that the League of Women Voters is so neutral on positions that I think matter so much.
Apologies for
no, it's okay.
commentary.
It's Mars offering his position. So yeah, they didn't even participate. And the other person who missed the forum was Dr. Emmett. And Dr. Emmett is another position one candidate. He did respond to the invitation and just said that his schedule wouldn't allow him to make it.
Yeah.
But we didn't even get a response. And I shouldn't say we, I'm not League of Women Voters, but could be. But anyway, they didn't even get a response from the far right candidates. They didn't have the courtesy to respond to the invitations. And that's an indicator of how out of touch that particular organization or effort is from just the mainstream normative everyday society that we all share. It's really frustrating to see, because despite the fact that they're not doing democratic society kind of politics, they still wield an outsized amount of power and clout in our community, and that's really scary and really unfortunate.
Yeah, it's very scary. So you're obviously leaning towards Nate McClintock.
Right. I think
Dare
Dr.
put
Daniel
you on the spot.
No, it's okay. I do think that Nate McClintock is the best candidate for position one. I don't have anything against Dr. Daniel Emmett in terms of his values and his work in the community. He's worked as a psychologist and therapist in the community, so he's worked with some of these kids who go through some of this difficult stuff that kids go through. We know
Right.
kids went through difficult stuff in our day at school, but we also know that now there are some crises and concerns that kids are facing, like they just went through the pandemic, that we never
Yeah.
had to deal with. And Dr. Emmett has, he has a big heart. He has a lot of insight into these student needs, and I think that he's definitely someone that we want to be listening to if we're
Mhm.
concerned about the well-being of students in the district. We definitely need his voice. Um, my concern is that the school board position would be just based on observation. Like his schedule didn't allow him to attend the forum. My concern
Yeah.
that the demands of the board would be a bit much for the way he's committed his time. And
Sure.
one of the
Sure.
things that really does push Nate McClintock over the edge for me in terms of my preference is that he's also a parent. Dr. Emmett isn't a parent, and I
Yeah.
know that's not a criteria for someone to be on the board, but I think it's valuable for someone who
Mhm.
is on the board to be a parent, because you're going to be liaisoning with parents. You're going to be relating to parents, and their parents are going to come from all different kinds of perspectives. They're going to have their own politics, their own ideologies, their own positions. But when it comes down to it, if you're a parent and they're a parent, there's a connection that you can form on that relationship, an
Sure.
understanding you can form. And I think that's
Right.
going to be really valuable because the far right has turned the school district into a cultural battleground. When you can find common ground in being a parent and caring about the kids together, then you can start to diffuse that kind of tension that they're deliberately creating. And so I do
Yeah.
think that Nate McClintock is just the better candidate simply on the fact that, first of all, he has all this professional expertise, but the fact that he's a
Right.
parent goes a long way.
Yeah, he
So
obviously attends a lot of council meetings, so he knows what.
yeah, he's not unfamiliar. And like I said, he's not a leftist by any means. Like I listening to
Yeah.
this guy
Yeah.
talk, he and I have some ideological differences, but
Right.
I don't think that's what's important when you're looking for someone to fill a nonpartisan position that has a functional
Sure.
responsibility. You need someone who knows how to treat that position as as a service to the public, not as
Yeah.
a tool for your own cultural war agenda. And that's one of the things that
Right.
I think Nate McClintock brings to the race that Ginger Kralachek does not bring to the race.
Yeah. Obviously.
Mhm.
All right. So you also then you have position 3.
Position three, yeah, we have of course the far right candidate in position three is Carol Yardley, and you've seen her signs everywhere, I'm sure. Those signs look like they were paid for by the same people that paid for the Faith Fest signs and for the Rob Taylor signs that we saw last year for his campaign. The signs are like they're very much designed. I don't know, maybe they just use the same company, and I'm being a little
Yeah.
bit, but yeah, it's very interesting to see that kind of commonality between all of these far right candidates. But running in the not taking a partisan position with a political agenda is you have a candidate like Hira Kadir, who is a mother. She has,
Hmm.
I think, 3 kids in the district, but I'm not positive about that number. She does have kids in the district.
Yeah.
She she works in a medical office, and she has a college education. She has an understanding about how boards work, what their responsibilities are. She was able to communicate her perspective as a parent, as someone who has been witness to the kinds of things that are happening in our country, and is very concerned about the safety and well-being of her kids in our schools, which I think a lot of parents can identify with right now. So I think she relates really well to parents, and not only being a parent, but having a lot of these serious concerns about our kids' safety, that a
Hmm.
lot of parents are bringing. And I I think she might have some difficulty in terms of being able to communicate with people clearly. There's just some vocal missteps I heard at the forum that I was just like, okay, I'm not sure where she is on certain issues or certain positions because of her word choice or
Mhm.
things like that. But I think if she's part of the board and part of a team, I think that can be, she can manage that. What she
Okay.
does bring is an awareness of the responsibilities of the position. What she brings a real passion and heart for students, and her role, especially in her role as a parent, and and she has this perspective of being able to cross different, to listen carefully and cross lines to build relationships. Her entire I felt like her entire focus at the forum was focusing on how important it is as a board member to listen to the people who are coming to you. So, in particular, to parents, to staff, administration, and especially to students. So, she really is going to, if she does get elected to that position, she wants to be a listener. And she wants to be
Okay.
someone who, in response to listening, facilitates relationships across people who are in conflict and tension, and try to bring people together, which I think is a really good way of looking at this effort to turn the district into a cultural battleground. It's a really good response to say, wait, no, let's simmer things down, let's calm things down, and let's try to listen to each other, and then try to focus on the things that are really going to matter for our students and our staff. So I think that even though I don't know that she has the same level of credential and skill that someone like Nate McClintock or Charlotte has, I think she has the understanding and she has the heart that the position needs. The other candidate,
Okay.
Elliot Adams, is very similar in that respect. I think that Elliot is a bit more ideological than
Okay.
Hira Kadir. In fact, in he's ideological in ways that I relate to. And, so I'm at the forum and I'm listening to Elliot talk, and he has some challenges with public speaking that I could recognize right off the bat. But when I got to talk to him one on one, those communication challenges like cleared right up, and we like instantly we could speak on the same page and understand each other.
Right.
And so I had this affinity for Elliot Adams just because of his political positions that he holds, and his perspective on how to diffuse this kind of far right agenda. That being said, I think that even though he takes positions that I would take, that he's got a lot of integrity in that respect. He's not the sort of person who's going to cave. I think there could be some concern on the part of some voters that, in the same way that, and I don't think that's what he wants. He wants to present himself as a candidate who brings balance, and he considers himself
Yeah.
very moderate, very moderate. But I do think that just because I know I'm not a moderate, and I know that I have some affinity with his positions, that I'm
Uh-huh.
like, maybe he's not as moderate as he thinks he is. And that might be a concern to some voters who I don't think he's going to make this position into a culture war. If he gets elected to the position, I think he's gonna lead from the center, and he's gonna lead from a perspective of every voice needs to be heard and included. But he's not gonna let religious voices take over. He's not gonna let bigoted voices take over. He's going to stand as a wall against that. And I want that kind of strength on a school board. But I
Yeah.
know that some people who are more concerned about the heightened tension about around this culture war issue might be looking at that and say, wait a minute, that might just escalate things. So I could see why some voters might lean towards Hira. If I was voting in the election, I know I would personally just like, I have this affinity for Elliot, but
Uh-huh.
but I just want to be honest about the impressions that I got in listening to both of those candidates talk. They both share
Yeah.
similar values in terms of wanting the district to work for everyone, wanting the district to be a nonpartisan, functional role that looks at the needs of the facilities in terms of improving those, passing bonds, that looks at the needs of students in terms of safety and education and healthy relationships, looks at the needs of staff in terms of resources and pay, compensation,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
looks at the parents in terms of their needs about and their concerns about students' well-being and safety and things like that. So both of
So
those candidates have a lot in common, and they both have some distinctions. Elliot's not a parent, for example, so
Hira is. Okay.
yeah. So and
So
Hira is.
so then the issue is if people can't make it, they split their vote, as you observed earlier, then Carol Yardley could
Yeah.
prevail.
Yeah. So one of the things that's been really interesting to see in this campaign is you see this effort on the far right to treat the election as a party election, and they went ahead and got the endorsement of the accused GOP. You can see on the mailers that they send out that this is being treated in a very partisan way by the far right.
Yeah.
And initially, the candidates that are running just as nonpartisan candidates, they're at a disadvantage in that respect, right? You have this party effort and this collective support for these three far right candidates, and you have each individual candidate that's running in the race, other than them, running an individual campaign. So you have Nate McClintock is running the McClintock campaign,
Right.
and Emmett is running the Emmett campaign. Elliot Adams is running the Adams campaign, and Kadir is running the Kadir campaign, and Hutt is running the Hutt campaign, and they're running individually as nonpartisan candidates. So obviously, the partisan candidates, the people with the party support, they have an advantage. They're running together, and when they're running in a three-way race, they're coalescing their ideological supporters around their own candidacy. Whereas these
Yeah.
other nonpartisan candidates are going to be getting votes from the people who have a more democratic, more public service minded approach to elections. And there's a very real risk that they're going to split the votes between the rational, reasonable, less ideologically agenda, culture war kind of voters. And the winner of those elections in the three-way races will be a candidate that has a minority of support, but still gets the most votes because the other two split the votes between them. So in
So did
response to, go ahead.
oh, you were going to mention the Democratic Party, the Coos Dems.
Yeah. So in response to that concern, we have seen in recent days the Coos Dems have went ahead and endorsed three candidates in those races
Okay.
because they want to try to highlight and show favoritism towards candidates that they're really hoping that voters will focus their votes on, so that they don't
Right.
split the vote, so that there isn't this like overall
Yeah.
loss to this far right agenda. The Dems aren't looking at the school board races as a partisan race. They're not looking at the candidates themselves as these people support our ideological agenda. Rather, what they're trying to do is preserve the nonpartisan position of those nonpartisan nature of those positions, and they are selecting candidates who actually will do that. Now, that feels like an oxymoron. It feels like a paradox. Here is a party supporting a nonpartisan race because they want the race to be nonpartisan. That feels weird, but that's really the goal. There is let's take let's do what we can to keep these really like far right political agenda partisan kinds of candidates out of office. Let's keep them out of office so that this district can work for everyone involved. And that's the role and response that the Democratic Party has had to take just to try to weather this onslaught from the far right.
Oh,
I think it could backfire. I do think it could backfire. But I also think that if they didn't, then it would be very hard for voters to get an idea of how do we know we're not splitting the vote. Now, what that means then is the Dems have gone ahead and they've endorsed Nate McClintock over Dr. Emmett. So they're hoping that voters all direct their votes at Nate McClintock, and that Nate McClintock will have the votes that he needs to overcome Ginger Kralichek's votes.
yeah.
They're also endorsing Hira Kadir.
Okay.
So basically, they went ahead and they've endorsed both of the parents in the race, and so they've endorsed Hira Kadir over Elliot Adams, and once
Okay.
again, the hope is on their part is that the voters will go for Hira Kadir, and she'll amass enough votes to overcome Carol Yardley.
Okay.
I think there's still that genuine risk that the three-way race will split votes, and that Carol Yardley and Ginger Kralichek will end up taking their positions. The position 7 race, I think, looks a little bit more even. Only 2 candidates in the race, Charlotte Hutt and Michelle Roberts. And Charlotte Hutt is an amazing candidate. I'm biased, and I'm not ashamed to say it. She has a lifelong educator background at multiple levels of education. She's been part of so many people's lives in the district. She has former students that are backing her. She's a retired educator, former colleagues that are backing her. She has so much support, and she has so much understanding and heart and passion for education that she's going to be bringing not only a lot of expertise and knowledge to the position, but she's going to be bringing a lot of community relationships and love for the role, and in a way that even surpasses any of the other candidates. I can't, just being there at the forum and listening every time that Charlotte was fielded a question, I was just like, oh, this person really gets it.
She knows what she's doing. Yeah.
She knows what she's doing. And again, like, I have ideological differences with her. She's very much more of, I have these very strong ideological and political positions that I hold, and I can recognize when someone doesn't hold them, but I can also recognize when they bring a level of expertise and heart that is going to make them excel at the position. And Charlotte is one of those people. She's going to absolutely excel at the school board. She's been in union negotiations on the teacher side of negotiations. So she's going to come to negotiations when they're dealing with the budget and they have to negotiate with the teachers union. She's going to come to those negotiations with an understanding of where the other side is coming from. And she's going to be able to, I think, handle negotiations really effectively because of that perspective and insight. And then they're going to be, this next board is going to be hiring a superintendent. That's one of the critical reasons. That's one of the reasons why this election is so critical, is this year they're hiring a superintendent. And the people who choose that superintendent are going to be deciding, it's going to be dependent on what kind of school board we have to do that. If you have candidates, like McClintock, like Charlotte Hutt, if you have them choosing a superintendent, you're going to choose a superintendent who's going to be focused on the economic and educational success of that district. They're going to focus on getting a superintendent who's going to build relationships with the broader community at large and make sure that educational institution serves the public. If you have far right candidates choosing a superintendent, you're going to have they're going to choose someone who's going to be very involved in religious life of a particular religious group, basically a conservative Christian church. They're going to choose someone who's going to advance a political agenda, who's going to interfere with and try to keep certain segments of the population from being included and having a voice and having their interests and needs met. In particular, I think the LGBTQ community, because that's where the efforts of the far right are in terms of creating a threat. But so I think that your choice in this election is not only who's leading the school board, but also who's leading the district and how that leadership looks, whether it's going to serve everybody in the community or whether it's just going to serve the particular political and religious interest in the community. And I think that's a really, really serious concern. So as far as, if I could just pick one person to be on that board, I think that the absolute strongest candidate in the race right now is Charlotte. She's just so amazing. She's such an amazing person. I was like, so excited about her candidacy. I was like, wow, I wish every school board had someone like her.
Well, me too.
And she has a website. You can check out her website. She has a website talking about her candidacy and things like that. So I think it's worth looking into. Of course,
know what it is, like Charlotte.
Off the top, hold on. If you're okay with me walking off the screen, I can go get her card.
Okay.
There we are. It is hutt4schools@gmail.com. That's HUTT 4schools@gmail.com. Oh, that's her email address. Her website is hutt4schools.com. So same, HUTT 4schools.com, hutt4schools.com. And and so that's Charlotte Hutt. And I'm not inclined to endorse candidates in an election that I can't even vote in, but I will go ahead and say that personally, Charlotte Hutt's my candidate. obviously there's 3 different positions being run. I'm just going to endorse the one in position 7 and say definitely vote for Charlotte Hunt if you can vote for anyone in the North Bend School District. She's amazing.
Okay.
And I think that's going to, every once in a while when we talk about politics, political campaigns on this show, every once in a while I'm going to probably end up like speaking up in favor of a particular candidate. I very rarely find candidates that share my politics and my ideology, but I am perfectly happy to endorse candidates who don't, who I still think would be going to be very effective, very positive leaders in that position. And in a nonpartisan position like school board, I'm absolutely happy to endorse someone who has a very different political or ideological perspective than me, but who shares some of the values, and particularly the democratic values that we share in terms of a society that meets the needs of all of its members, not just a select favored few.
Well, if I could vote over there, I would vote for Charlotte for sure. We're at about an hour and 5 minutes.
Yeah, wow, look what we did.
Yeah.
That's a full show.
So I think it's time we should wrap this up, but I do want to, number one, thank you for all your work on this and enlightening us about the travails that are being thrown at kids.
Yeah.
Just kids.
Yeah.
And it is sad to see that the local provocateur, outrage machine operator can be so vicious. But
yeah, but they're not the majority voice, and we are starting to find people responding and recognizing the threat and responding to it, and that's coming across a broad spectrum of people in our community, not the far left, not leftists and liberals, a broad range of conservatives, centrists, moderates, liberals, and leftists, all recognizing that this fringe group does not meet the interests of everybody, and that ultimately what they're going to do is they're going to deteriorate the institutions that serve our public, because they aren't using those institutions for the purpose they were designed, which is public service. They're using it for political power. And so I do think that ultimately we're going to be able to coalesce a response to this that does restore our democratic norms and restores a community that serves everyone's needs. So I think that's gonna work out. I hope that our audience is going to be involved in that in whatever community you are in. Check out your local races, identify the candidates that are going to be holding on to those democratic norms, and vote for them, even if they're not exactly politically or ideologically aligned with you. If their interest is serving the public good rather than a far right fringe agenda, get them into office, because these nonpartisan positions especially are designed with functional intent. They're functional purpose. They have a functional purpose, and if they're being filled by someone who does not meet that purpose, you're going to start to see institutional collapse. You're going to start to see services decline, and people's needs not being met, and community services just starting to fade away. And that's just one of the symptoms of culture war becoming the dominant way in which people do politics rather than public service.
Just because you're a religious fascist or you use God as a prop doesn't mean you're competent.
And oftentimes they're not being elected for their skills, for their competence. They're being elected because of what they believe, which means you get people who don't have the skills, who don't have the knowledge, they don't know how the system works, and even if they did, they're not using it for the purpose it was designed, which is public service. They're using it for political clout and political power. And we can see that with some of the candidates who already have been elected and the kinds of damage that they're already doing. So I really do hope that we can continue to be, even though we do come from a further left than Ann Coulter position, that we can find
our
audience. I know, I hope that we can find that our audience is a broad range of listeners of of cultural and political and ideological perspectives, and that you find common voice and you hear things that matter to you and are important to you, and speak to your needs and concerns here on this show. So we're going to just keep doing the show with that kind of broad public minded perspective, and hopefully, and of course we're grateful for anyone who listens and participates, and hopefully we're able to serve our community in the way that we can as commentators, as analyzers, and as informers.
With that, I want to thank everybody who listens and encourage everybody to get involved as much as possible. And I definitely want to thank my co-host, and I'm so grateful to all of you and to Israel, and let's go get them. Ciao for now.
All right. Yep. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.